Hey everybody! If you watched last week's video, you will know that I'd been laying a floor in the gallery of my doll's house that I'm renovating. And at the end of the video, it wasn't fully dry. In fact, it wasn't dry at all. So in this video, I'm going to be talking to you about how it was looking in the days after my last video, and also what else I've been doing in the doll's house. So last Wednesday was the second day after I'd laid the floor, and this was how it was looking. As you can see, it looks as though the filler that I'd used and the PVA glue that I'd used were starting to separate. So I shut the door on the doll's house and I left it to dry, hoping that it would look a little bit better in the morning. Well, on Thursday, which was day 3 after I'd laid the floor, it looked very much the same. I decided to remove this barrier at the front so that I could check to see if the polyfiller was holding its shape. Obviously this was a risk because I didn't want the flooring to spill off the front of the doll's house. So I carefully removed this piece of cardboard. Thankfully it did come away easily, and the filler was still soft enough to straighten off the edge, but it wasn't so liquidy that it ran off the edge, so it was perfect. I was a little bit concerned that the flooring on the left side here was still very runny, but thankfully, as I left it, it did hold its shape. I also used this time to remove any filler that was on this little doorstep area, because this would prevent the door from shutting if it was left. So the left side of the flooring here was still very wet, but the right side was starting to dry. I'm assuming that this is because I'd made up multiple batches of the solution and that maybe the solution that I poured on the left hand side had more glue in it. So the day after this, the flooring looked much the same. It had dried a little bit more. And you can see at the front here that the flooring is starting to go a paler colour, and at the back it's a deeper colour. So I think that the back is a little bit less dry than the front. I do think that the gold paint within the mixture has sort of disappeared. There's a little bit of it at the front there, but it's not as obvious as I had hoped that it would be. And I did think that this flooring was looking a little bit like the surface of the moon, which wasn't really the effect that I was going for. So I decided that I would start on some other jobs on the doll's house whilst this floor was drying. And one of the jobs that I needed to do was to tidy up this area between the ceiling of the gallery and the floor of the apartment above. So in between these two pieces of wood is the battery pack for the lights from the art gallery. So I need to make a piece of wood that will sit here, that I can still open so that I can access the battery pack and switch the lights on and change the batteries, but that will be thin enough so that the door will still be able to shut. Unfortunately, I didn't have one length of wood that was long enough to go all the way across, so I was going to have to connect two pieces together. And I needed to work out a way of fitting this piece of wood so that it would sit at the correct angle, but it could still be opened and shut. So I started by just using some masking tape to tape it into position. And this helped me to work out whether I needed to adjust the length of this wood and also the depth of it. Thankfully, the depth of it seemed to be the exact distance between the top of the parquet flooring and the bottom of the gallery ceiling. Now, as you can see, this piece of wood was preventing the door from shutting, but I could just about shut the door. What it did do was mean that the door didn't sit quite right on the doorstep at the bottom here. So I decided to trim this little edge off because I felt like that was sitting over the frame of the doll's house, so that was probably causing that piece of wood to just make the doll's house door sit a little bit further out than it should. As this piece of wood was still sitting a little bit out from the doll's house frame, I decided to try and sand down these edges, just so that the piece of wood could sit a little bit more snugly. Sandpaper didn't make much of a difference, so I did then try to use my Stanley knife just to peel a little bit of the wood away. Obviously I'm using a sharp knife here. Please don't copy what I'm doing because I don't know the safest way to do things. So yeah, this isn't a tutorial, just like I always say, it's a diary entry. I don't think that this tool was the best one to use. I could have done with a miniature plane, but that's the type of tool that I'm not sure I would use that often, so I don't have one. I am actually considering updating my toolbox, so I would love to hear what sort of tools you use a lot, because if you're used to doing model making or making miniatures, I imagine that there are key tools that are really good to have in your toolbox. So if you have any that you use all the time or that you would recommend that I get, please leave it in the comments. That would be really helpful. So whilst I was working on making sure that that door was shutting properly, I also decided to just work a little bit more on this doorstep to make sure that it was a nice flat edge. The door was now able to shut a little bit more comfortably, but I decided to sand down this piece of wood just to try and take away a little bit of its width, or depth I should say. And this also helped actually to just make the piece of wood look a little bit smoother and a little bit nicer. So now it was time to try and work out how to join these two pieces of wood together. I decided to use a piece of fabric to line the back of the two pieces of wood, and I was going to attach this using PVA glue. Now I decided to leave an edge on this fabric because I was hoping that I would be able to fold it over and stick the bit that wasn't attached to the wood to the underside of the parquet flooring to create a hinge. The reason I've put a piece of foam board here whilst I'm sticking this piece of fabric down is because the parquet flooring is about the width of a piece of foam board. So I wanted to make sure that the material was going to sit underneath the piece of foam board, the parquet flooring area, so that it didn't add an extra little bit of width that made it come out away from the house and block the door again. I poured far too much glue by accident, and you might notice that I'm now using my practice piece of flooring from last week as a palette, because why not? Of course, I wasn't sure if this was going to work or not. I do very much just experiment all the time as I'm going along. Another reason why these aren't tutorials, they are diary entries. And I carefully positioned this piece of fabric so that it sat against the foam board and didn't go off the edge of the wood. And I just wiped away any glue that had pressed out over the edge. And then of course I needed to leave this to dry. So on to Saturday, which was day 5 since I had laid the gallery flooring. Let's have a look and see whether it's dry yet. Nope. So the area on the left was still very gluey and wet. And I really wasn't pleased with this area in the middle, which now was dry, but you could really see where the filler had dripped down as I'd been pouring it. So this really wasn't the effect that I wanted. I also found sawdust in the corner where I had been shaving some of the edges of the plywood on the ceiling off the day before. And of course this had settled into the wet filler here. Now, I couldn't really pick this out at this stage because it was going to leave little dents in the flooring, so I've had to just leave it. So I shut that door again and I decided to go back to the piece of wood that I was using to put over the gap where the floor meets the ceiling. And this was dry, thankfully. So I really carefully removed it. I'd actually been using a miniature bookcase as a stand there, so I was being very careful as I took the masking tape off because I didn't want to strip any of the varnish or the paint away from that bookcase. So I did find that this material had stuck a little bit to the foam board, which isn't what I'd wanted it to do, but I gently peeled it away. It was fine. I did have to use my standing knife just to remove this, so obviously please don't copy me. Thank you. When I peeled the masking tape away from the centre, the material on the back of the two pieces of wood held them together really nicely. So now I had to work out whether this material could be used as the hinge. It was a little bit too big, so I tried to trim it down. But unfortunately this didn't work. It would have worked if I was attaching it before I'd glued down the parquet flooring, but the flooring was already glued down, so I decided to trim this piece of excess material away and then come up with a new idea. It would have been a lot easier if I could just attach this piece of wood permanently, but obviously I did need to be able to access the battery pack for the lighting. So I finally bought some new pliers. I have needed some little pliers for such a long time. I've been using some really big pliers that haven't really been very helpful in the past. So I have bought some pliers and they were secondhand and they came with all these little jewellery findings. So I thought I'd see if I could use some of these. My thought was that maybe I could attach a little sort of pin like this. And this isn't actually a pin, it's for jewellery making, so it's not got a sharp end. And then maybe I could use the hook at the end of this piece so that I could hang the little piece of wood like a sign. Talking of signs, I was considering writing or painting the name of my art gallery onto this piece of wood so that it was like the shop sign. What do you think of that idea? Because that's an option. Obviously it's unusual to have that inside the doll's house, and I will also put one on the outside of the doll's house. Or the other option would be to paint it just the same colour as the rest of the frame of the doll's house. Please let me know what you think in the comments. I did ask the question on Instagram and also on YouTube, and I had some really good comments about the colours that people thought that the sign should be, and also the name of the gallery as well. So please share your ideas with me. I do think that a dark sign could potentially look really lovely. However, that might draw so much attention towards it that would it make the rest of the doll's house not look so good? Do you think it should maybe be a lighter sign? Or do you think it just shouldn't be a sign at all and I should just paint it the same colour as the rest of the inside frame? I'm undecided at the moment. So Sunday, day 6. Was the floor dry? No, it wasn't. It was getting there though. The area at the back is now sort of a smaller gluey patch. I shouldn't have tested it with my finger there because it does now have a fingerprint in it. I decided to sand down the area that was already dry just to see if I could get rid of a few of those raised edges. Don't worry, I'm not writing on my doll's house floor here. I decided to do some experiments on the piece of flooring that I'd done in a previous video when I did this mixture on a piece of foam board. This is what I was originally going to use as my doll's house floor, but as it dried it had bent. So I had then in the last video laid the flooring straight onto the wood of the doll's house. So I thought I would use this bit for some further experiments because it was looking like I wasn't going to be able to smooth out the doll's house floor enough to get the look that I wanted. So I was now wondering if I was going to have to lay another floor on top. So I decided to make some different mixtures. So one with filler and glue and paint, and one without the glue. And then I also decided to do the same mixtures, but to lay a piece of plastic over the top, which I was hoping I might be able to peel away so that the surface would be a lot flatter and smoother. And I also tried these experiments just with paint and glue. Whilst doing this, I also had a little idea, because I wondered whether this sort of mixture with just the glue and the paint might work for bathroom tiles. So I decided to just do a little experiment, because obviously in a future video at some point I am going to want to be making tiles for my bathroom area, although that seems quite a long way off at the moment. Then I decided to do the same thing, thinking about slate tiles for my doll's house roof. So I made up some grey liquid and I added some glue, and again I just laid it on a piece of plastic and laid a piece of plastic over. This might not work at all, but I thought whilst I had all of these materials out, I would just maybe do a few extra experiments. If you've made slate tiles before for your doll's house, please can you let me know how you've done it? I would love to hear any success stories or anything that went wrong as well. Anything for me to avoid. That would be really helpful. Thank you. So on to Monday. Day 7 since I'd laid the gallery flooring. And the gallery flooring was still not dry and the experiments weren't dry either. So I decided to do some artwork today. And what I was doing was I was drawing an illustration of a little mouse, and I'm going to turn it into a greetings card. He's holding a blackberry that's in the shape of a heart, so I thought it might be quite nice for Valentine's Day. I also decided to make this illustration into an art print with a space where a special name or a date could be put, because I just thought that it would look really lovely. So this is my most recent illustration, and I'd love to know what you think of it. I'm aware that this isn't related to dolls' houses, so I hope you don't mind that I've put a little bit of my artwork into this video as well, because seeing as the doll's house still wasn't dry, there wasn't a lot more that I could do on it on the Thursday. For anyone who doesn't know, I do have a little Etsy shop. It's called The Little Mouse's House. I'll pop the link in the description below if you want to take a look, and I sell my illustrations in the form of art prints and greetings cards and bookmarks. I'm not sure if I have to say that that's an advert or not, so I will say that that's an advert for my own little business. So I had to photograph my products for my Etsy shop. I find this bit really tricky. I find it really hard, and the reason that I find it hard to photograph my products is because the lighting in my house is quite dark. And I really love photography, but yeah, it's just something that I find really, really tricky to do. Because I always find that I have a shadow as well in the pictures where the light is coming in through the window, but my camera on my phone is blocking the light. Anyway, on to day 8, which was yesterday, the day before I'm uploading this video. The area in the left-hand corner at the back no longer looked like glue, so it was pretty much dry. So I decided to have a look at my experiments as well, and the areas where I'd laid the mixture that was made of filler and glue were quite spongy, and the areas where it was just glue had run away. So this experiment looked the best to me, which was just filler and gold paint, and the bottom one is where the gold paint was fully mixed in, and the top one, the gold paint was just marbled in. In the areas where I'd laid plastic over the top to try and make it smoother, for the mixtures that contained glue, they were still wet. For the mixture that didn't contain glue, it had dried, but it had dried with quite a lot of air bubbles in it. It was really nice and smooth though, so I knew that I was going to probably have to lay a new flooring over the top. So I needed to make a decision whether to do this technique or the technique without the plastic over the top, but I definitely knew that I was just going to use filler and paint with no glue. Before making a new flooring to go over the top, I did have one last go at trying to smooth down this flooring. So I decided to use my sander. Obviously I wore a mask, I made sure my cat wasn't in the room because I didn't want her to breathe in the dust, and I opened the doors as well. I didn't record this section because I didn't want to get dust in my camera lens. So after I had sanded the floor down, I removed all of the dust. And I'm considering keeping some of this dust because I think it looks like flour, and I'm thinking maybe in my doll's house kitchen I could put it into a little jar and have a little jar of flour on the shelf. What do you think? I'm just not sure where to put the dust for now. Maybe I need to get some little jars for now and make little jars of flour and keep them safe somewhere. So sanding down the floor definitely helped. It looked a lot better. However, this area where the glue was actually looked as if basically the glue had just completely gone, and it was just an area of the wood that I'd poured the mixture onto. So I did need to add a new floor basically. So I went through the same steps as before, where I made a little barrier at the front because I didn't want the mixture to spill off the edge. And I made up some new mixture. I wanted to make a larger amount of mixture because I found that one of the problems with my flooring that I'd already made was that I'd made up a couple of batches of mixture of different consistencies and they'd all dried differently. But I was running out of filler, which was really unfortunate because I needed a lot of it, and it's very hard to judge how much I need. I used cups before, but I thought if I work in a tub then I'll be able to fit more of one mixture in. But as it happened, I think I actually made less than 1 cupful. Accidentally. So I marbled the paint into the filler and water mixture, and then I poured it over the floor. So basically, this is just what I should have done right at the beginning. I just shouldn't have used glue. I should have done a mixture of filler and water and paint. I should have poured it onto the floor and I should have left it like this. This looks like it's got quite a bit more paint in it than when I tried previously, and that is on purpose because I found that the gold paint had disappeared on my, I was going to say first attempt, but it's actually my second because the first attempt was on the foam board. So Wednesday, which is today when I'm posting the video. So let's have a look. So I opened the door and the flooring looked like it might be dry. So I removed this piece of cardboard from the front. So the glue was definitely the thing that was stopping the floor from drying, because this has only been down for less than a day and it's dry. So this is what it's looking like. It does look a little bit bumpy. And also obviously I need to paint the walls again now. But it felt better. When I felt it, I did find that some of the paint was a little bit wet, so it wasn't fully dry. But it's certainly better than the floor that I'd laid previously. So I'm going to leave this to fully dry now, and then I am going to sand it down. But it's pretty much finished. I feel like it's taken a long time to do this floor, but I think we're nearly there. And so that is where I'm going to leave the floor for now. In next week's video, I will show you the floor complete after it's been sanded, but I'm also going to be working on the exterior of the doll's house because I want to make brickwork a little bit like this brickwork that I did on my Tudor doll's house. But I don't want the bricks to be identical to this. I think that the colours need to be a little bit different, and I also have a few techniques that I'm going to change from when I did this brickwork because there are a few areas that I wasn't happy with, and basically I've learnt what I can do differently. So these are the bricks that I've currently got on this doll's house, and it's just paper bricks, and the reason that I want to go over them is because I want them to be 3D and a little bit more realistic. And obviously I've also got the windows and doors to work on, the chimneys, the roof, but yeah, next week, brickwork. If you have any suggestions on how to make realistic looking miniature bricks, then please do leave them in the comments because it would be really interesting to hear. So thank you so much for watching. Please do leave a comment because I absolutely love to read them all, and I hope that you have a lovely week, and I will see you in the next video.